we have a panel discussion on Comfy and Cozy Mysteries moderated by Amy Tector. Amy Tector is the author of The Foulest Things and described as a literary joyride by Louise Penny. Please lend a warm welcome to Amy and her guests.
Thank you so much. People can hear me? Yes. Okay. I'm not getting any messages. So thank you so much for that welcome. I'm really delighted to be here today talking about cozy mysteries. I've got three very exciting guests. Let me just pull up the introduction, which I had ready to go. There we go. So my three guests are the three people that are chatting today in conversation. Mary Jane Maffini is an award-winning stalwart of the Ottawa mystery writing scene. She's written 12 novels and will be releasing her latest, You Light Up My Life. You Light Up My Death. Which I'm very excited about. I've got my order in at the Spaniel's Tail, Ottawa's newest independent bookstore. And I didn't know this until I was doing a bit of research, but Mary Jane is a, quote, lapsed librarian, which of course thrills my own archivist heart. We also have Mike Martin, who is the author of the award-winning Sergeant Wildflower mystery series, set in Grand Banks, Newfoundland. Mike is doing a wonderful fundraiser for the Minawashan Lodge Indigenous Women's Support Center. And if you donate to the center, Mike will send you a signed copy of his children's book, The Christmas Beaver. So a wonderful sort of 2-for-1, and you can go to his website and get more information there. And Mike's recently released Christmas in Newfoundland Book 2, which is a second collection of stories and memories from Newfoundland. So another wonderful Christmas present. And Dawn Butler's debut novel, A Life of Bliss, came out in 2021. It follows a timid travel writer to Greece, where he attempts to ferret out famed opera singer Maria Callas' most well-guarded secrets. Prior to becoming a novelist, Dawn worked at the Ottawa Citizen for many years, including 6 as the paper's executive editor. So welcome, everybody. We're talking today on this gray, damp day about cozy mysteries. So I think it's very appropriate. And I'm going to start off with a sort of general question. And I'll start with you, Mary Jane. What makes a cozy a cozy? What is a cozy?
Well, that's one of my favorite questions. Cozy's, and it's a moving target, actually. So a few years ago, when I first got into the cozy racket, you had to have no sex, no swearing, no blood on the page. And so, but that's a very limiting thing. Actually, cozies are way beyond that. And all of us have, and usually it's an amateur sleuth in a small town setting, but cozies go way beyond that because we all have cozy aspects in our books. I've read everybody's books here, and they all have wonder. The wonder of cozies is that they're very comforting. There is something soothing and also quite an optimistic form of literature, shall we say, and a part of the genre, because something in a community is put wrong. People in that community, it's a sleuth acting alone, or usually with friends and neighbors helping them, or family members. And so it's a wonderful example of optimistic and also good role models of people like us stepping up where they need to. So I think that cozies are very affirming to the reader, and the darker the times, the more valuable they are. I mean, they're less dangerous than hard drugs. You don't have a hangover from reading them. Yeah. I just say go cozy all the way. That's a big part of what they are.
Oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't sort of thought of it in those terms.
Medicinal.
Yes. And I like this idea of the cozy racket too. Mike, what's your sort of vibe on cozies, having written quite a number of them now?
Well, I mean, I'm hoping to expand the cozy subgenre. That's my goal in life. But usually a cozy has a picture of a pet on the front, either a dog or a cat, and it usually features a small town amateur sleuth, usually a woman. And that's the sort of model of cozy. But I think it's expand, and you can still find many of those, and some great stories. but the subgenre is expanded, and it's all over the place now. There's lighthouse mysteries, cozy mysteries. There's bookshop cozy
Mhm.
mysteries.
Yeah.
I like what Vicky Delaney said earlier in one of the sessions. She said a cozy is about the setting. It's actually about the place.
Yeah.
It's nice people in a nice place, and something bad happens.
Yeah.
You never really see exactly what happens, and it usually happens to somebody who doesn't live there, right? I set my series in Grand Bank in Newfoundland. That's only about 2,000 people, and I've killed at least 25 or 30. And so you have to bring in people from outside, villains, somebody everybody hates. But to me, it's more about place and story than it is about what the constrictions of the genre are.
Yeah. Oh, very, very interesting. Thanks, Mike. And Dawn, I know yours isn't maybe quite a cozy. But it's cozy-ish, cozy adjacent. I'm cozy adjacent too. I don't think I'm quite a cozy either.
Yeah. I mean, my story doesn't have any murders, and well, it actually does have a murder, but the murder is not central to the story. And it's a different type of mystery. It's trying to basically find a lost child, locate where that person is. So there's a lot of mystery trying to figure that out. But one thing that I like about the cozies that I've seen, and I think it's reflected a little bit in some of my in my book and the one I'm working on now, is a sense of humor. Often it makes you smile. It's written in a lighter tone. It's not all Sturm and Dang, it's not that kind of thing. It makes you laugh, and the characters, there's often a lot of smaller characters, supporting characters who are kind of eccentric or oddballs, and are really there for comic relief as much as anything. So that makes it a fun read. A cozy is a fun read. It's not going to hurt your brain too much. And because all the serious crime and death and destruction occurs off screen or off stage, it's not upsetting either. You do know that there's something bad that's happened, but the focus is more on the problem solving and the puzzle solving than it is on suspense and terror and all that sort of thing. It's very, very easy to kind of just sit down and enjoy a book like that.
Well, and that brings me to my next question then, which is that kind of lightness of touch, right? I was listening earlier to the procedurals session this morning, and it was, that's a more grim, kind of gritty type of writing. The cozies don't have that. Everybody has said it now, like the sort of small town, the lightness. So but usually, not in your case, Dawn, but usually they center on a murder, which is essentially the worst thing that can, that we can do to one another. So why? I'm just curious about that, sort of the lightness of the tone and then the extreme darkness of the subject matter. And I don't know, Dawn, if you've got any thoughts on that juxtaposition and I don't know, either why humor or just general lightness, coziness, cats, bookstores, etc. Why that works.
Yeah, well, I think there are people who enjoy, that sort of more graphic material, but there are also a lot of people who don't, who would be put off by violence, explicit violence, or explicit sex even. And so those things can be navigated, I think, with a cozy that allows people to enjoy vicariously the story and imagine themselves almost as characters in it. That these are the characters in a cozy are often people you would recognize from your own circle, your own town. And you can relate to them in a way that you might not to a story that has like a psychopathic killer in it or something. Of that nature.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the reasons why the likeness works.
Yeah. And Mary Jane, maybe you said something too, I think earlier about putting things to rights. You sort of you nice people in a nice, or where something goes wrong and then it gets put to rights. Is that part of that then,
Yes, I think it's an important part of it, but we're talking about the lightness. The lightness in cozies, and certainly I'm speaking for my own books, does not center with the murder. Murder is still taken seriously, and I apologize to everybody for the dead guy in Not Quite Wakefield who was found with the smile crazy glued on his face. That was just an aberration, Amy. So, but normally we don't make fun of the corpse. We don't make fun of the murdered situation. We don't make fun of the survivors. But we take it seriously, but we're not rolling around it. We're not luxuriating in the bad thing that happened. you know, a lot of very gritty, edgy, dark books, a lot of those authors see themselves as writing a higher level
Mm.
of work than the lighter, cozier ones. And I disagree. I think there's a lot of almost like torture porn that people are exposed to. And I don't actually think it's a higher way to be or to read. And what we're trying to promote, I think, is even when bad things happen, a light touch is good. Humor is good. Humor among characters and friends is good. It's a survival technique, and it's actually much cleverer than I think some of the really dark, let's say, rolling around in the gore. There you go. All I have to say.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, I love how articulate you are in defending cozies. It's very inspiring.
Oh, get them.
Mike, anything further to add to that question of lightness, humor, and in the face of murder and death?
Well, see, my goal has always been to create an imaginary world, even though I use a real place with imaginary people, even though some people think they're in the books. Because when you write in a small town, people tend to think, well, I know who that person was, right? But the creating an imaginary world where people can go and escape for 2 or 3 hours, right? And when they get to the end, they say that was a good story, and they don't say that was awful what happened to that person, right? Because it's not real. Like, we're not talking real world here where somebody got hurt or somebody got killed. It's like, this is an imaginary world. And the other fun part is people are trying to figure out who did it. You know, and I love what Barbara Franklin talks about, that, you know, the writing a mystery, any kind of mystery, is you kill somebody and then you spend 250 pages describing how you solve the mystery, right? And really, you could have told people on page 4 who did it, but the fun is the reader gets to go through it, and in this imaginary world, they get to figure out who did it. And most times you can figure out who did it long before, like, the actual reveal.
I think there's something in that too, because I certainly read mysteries for the puzzle of it, you know, that I you know, it's that tension where I want to have enough clues so that I can make my, you know, I can work out my theories. And then it's wonderful when the author can then give you a little bit of a surprise or a twist and keep you guessing right to the end. So that sort of puzzle aspect, I think, is an important part of it too. Well, Mike, you were talking as well about setting and how important the setting is. I think I misattributed before, but anyway. And so I think the one of the main characters, as we've been talking about in a cozy, is that idea of setting. And yours, in fact, everybody here on this panel, myself included, setting is really important for our books. So can you talk a little bit about, you know, bringing that person to the setting?
Well, I mean, the setting is a character in itself. That's what I would say. The setting is a character of the book. Like Newfoundland and Grand Bank is a setting. It's much more than simply where it takes place. It's like you get to explore all the nooks and crannies of the place, and so everything that happens there, even the weather, becomes a characteristic of the books. And, you know, like if you go to Grand Bank or go to Newfoundland, then that's all everybody talks about is the weather, because the weather is bad, it's good, it's bad, it's good, all in one day, right? I mean, Ottawa's starting to get to be like that now, but then certainly on the East Coast, the weather is a big part of it. And for me, I always wanted to set my book in Newfoundland, right? I mean, that was my goal, and it was a way for me to connect to the place. And I also always put a little bit of history about Grand Bank or Newfoundland in the books. And it's fun for me to look it up, and it's fun for me to share with people.
And is that sort of a technique then that you use to evoke setting? Is that extra bit of research around the history? Is that sort of how you help bring readers there?
Well, I hope that people would follow those little crumbs I lay down and say, oh, that's interesting about how Grand Bank was the salt fish capital of the world, right? That they created their own ships, the Grand Bank schooners, and long before there was refrigeration, this is the way the world survived, right? The world survived. Europeans came over to get the salt fish, bring it and get the fish, salted and brought it back. And in Grand Bank, they salted the fish, sent it to Jamaica, and got back rum, which they made Newfoundland Screech out of. So it was all perfect.
Yeah. It's quite the circle. Okay, well, that's great. What about you, Dawn? I know that that for you, setting is obviously really important in your novel. Is it another character? Is Greece another character?
I hadn't really thought of it that way, but I suppose it is. I mean, my novel is set partly in Ottawa, of course, because it's set in a newsroom where I spent my career, my working career, not the same newsroom, but it has inspired the newsroom that I created. So a lot of it happens, or the first part of it happens in Ottawa, and then it transfers to Greece as the mystery really gets pursued at that point. And I think that that's a key in terms of evoking that place. I thought of Greece because I'd been there a few times. And in fact, before I wrote this book, which I actually wrote a while ago and then finished after I left the Citizen, I made a trip to Greece with my wife. It was a vacation, but we did all the route that I had in mind for my character in Greece. So we got on a little narrow gauge train and we went down through the Peloponnese, and we rented a car and we drove around to the various places that I knew would be in the book. So basically I was taking notes the whole time. And when I sat down to write the Greek portion of it, I think that was almost indispensable. I don't think I could have written the same book if I hadn't done that. And to me, that's, I guess it's possible to get a place or evoke a place without ever being there if you do enough research. But I think it really adds a degree of authenticity if you can sort of have been there yourself and you can really pull the descriptions out that you saw yourself.
So that's kind of what you relied on for this then, is that you viscerally were there. You knew how the sun felt on the skin and what the olives tasted like.
Yeah, and all the landscape descriptions while the train is traveling through the Peloponnese. I mean, I was looking out the window and jotting things down, and that's basically the only way I was able to make that sound real, I guess, or authentic.
Yeah. And of course, you make a good point too, that the Ottawa part is as much sort of this as setting as well, in the specifics of a newsroom. It's interesting, you're writing a fictionalized version of your workplace, which is what I did in my novel, The Foulest Things, as well. And it's just very important always to emphasize highly fictionalized.
There in my book, there are perhaps one or two characters that some of my fellow colleagues might sort of recognize, but they don't have the same names.
Oh, I still work at the National Archives, so I hope there's nobody recognizable, and there shouldn't be. They're all invented. Mary Jane, what about you?
I have a 3.5 series, and so place is important in different degrees. And so when I wrote the Charlotte Adams books, which are really American books, they were done on a proposal. I submitted a proposal, got that contract. I set them in a place I had not been to, and it did not ring true. And one of my critique group made this point that they didn't get a sense of place. So we, and I think it was based on her recommendation, drove down to Kingston, New York, and spent a few days there and based it on Kingston, New York. And then it did start to take on some reality. But Ottawa, where most of my books are set, the Camilla McPhee books, they're set with the backdrop of the Ottawa festivals. When we moved here, our kids were young, and I couldn't believe we moved from the East Coast, which is a fabulous place to live, at Halifax, Dartmouth, but they don't have the kinds of festivals we have here, don't have the kind of winters either. And so this idea that you took your kids to events at Tulip Fest, you took them to Winterlude, and all of these things. But at that time I was starting to write, and the big question we asked ourselves was, what's the worst that can happen in any environment, right? So you're walking through, say, the sculpture garden in Winterlude, and you say, what's the worst that can happen? And the next thing you know, you have a body in an ice sculpture. So our a very interesting city with all of these wonderful festivals gives a lot of texture and reality to it, but also provides so many opportunities. I mean, there were so many opportunities in your book in Greece that we wouldn't have here, Dawn. I found that, right? And I know Mike has opportunities in Newfoundland and Grand Bank that we don't have here. So we have to harvest what we have. And I feel really fortunate but every now and then we have to get away. So Camilla, in the 7th book, she is eloping to Cape Breton. She's from Cape Breton. And every time, the last, I think maybe 5 times I've been to Cape Breton, there have been 4 hurricanes, right? Over 5. They've asked me not to come back.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I wanted to harvest that. Hurricane season in the fall is there,
Yeah.
and it's very real. And so, so those parts of the setting, they're awful if you're living through them, trying to cook a Thanksgiving turkey with no power, for instance. But they're great if you drive by an outhouse that's at a 45-degree angle, nice
Mhm.
bright blue one with uprooted trees around it. And again, you say, what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so again, you can you have to note the specifics of the setting and just just make the best of them, because they're really like the Christmas gift that keeps on giving for an author.
Yeah, and I love that. That's so beautifully said, to harvest the details and harvest the vibe, really. Yeah, that's a great advice. All right. Oh, what about series? I know Mike and Mary Jane, you both are working in series, and particularly I think with cozies, although many mysteries lend themselves, but this idea of the recurring cast of characters, how does that interplay work? And what are the joys and the pains of working in a series? And then Dawn, I'll come to you last and ask about what your plans are, or if you have plans, or if you're interested in a series. Mike, I don't know if you want to kick us off.
Sure. So let me just say the downside of a series is you have to remember what you did before. And that's where a good editor and good better readers come in, because our memories don't get better as we get older. And but I never set out to write a series. I set out to write a book, and I found the right sort of frame for it, which was a light mystery. But I didn't. Then when I started writing, I didn't know how to end it. And I still don't know how to end it. But and so I went to my partner, who's the expert in the mystery genre in our family. And she used to go to Primetime Brooks on Bank Street that Mary Jane and Linda Wicken ran years and years ago. And she said, well, why don't you make it a series? And I thought, okay. So I didn't have to end the story. You just end that episode and you move to the next story. And so the advantage of having a series is the familiarity that I have with the characters. I mean, when I'm writing a book in the series, the characters are in my head and yelling at me, trying to get attention, and I have to sort them out and decide which ones are going to get into the book. And maybe that's the same as other authors, but these are the same people, right? This is like your family are yelling at you, right? And so it's hard to ignore those voices when they start coming. And the other thing is, I think there's a value for the readers, right? That they want to know what happened to Windflower, what happened to Eddie Tizard, what happened to that guy, whatever his name was. What's going on with the dog, right? Like it's like the familiarity that you gain from the series is great. And let me say this last thing, which is, obviously it's good for promotion and sales, right? I mean, that's how it works. I mean, I do a lot of work on promoting my latest book. And I don't do anything about the backlist, because your new book will sell the backlist. And that's how it works, right? And so, Don, you better get another 6 books in so you can start taking advantage of that, because and let me just say the last thing around series is you get better. You get better. Your first book is maybe your baby, and it will always be your favorite book. But your next book will be better, and I hope to keep getting better until I run out of time.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Mary Jane, thoughts on series?
Sorry, I always read series. I read series in my darkest hours in the federal government. When I had big problems in the 90s, I would just mainline them. And so I read them because I love the world in that cozy type thing, but series are also, Harry Bosch, that's part of the series. You care about the characters over time. You care about them as they deal with the demons they're grappling with, the difficulties they have. You want to know what happens to them. And readers write to us about that. And I think it's very important. One of the downfalls, though, is when you set up an early book, and Mike was saying you get better, and you wish, had I but known.
Yeah, yeah.
Had I but known not to give Camilla 3 sisters and 2 sidekicks. And so, because once you set up these characters, you have to do something with them because that is expected by the readers. And so what happens is you have a pretty crowded stage as time goes on. In book 3, I had to send the sisters on a trip to Scotland just to give her a break. They were giving her a hard time, and it was hard for me to manage.
Yes.
So the other constraint with a series is that it's going to go on. You're going to have one main character, and that's really who people love the sidekicks and everything, but if they don't like the main character, they won't stick with it. But here's the problem. You also have to like your main character as an author, because you're going to spend more time with that protagonist than you ever do with your partner or your spouse. And so you have to make them, they have to have feet of clay, because otherwise people get really ticked off and walk away. But they also have to be likable and be prepared to change a bit. So this is a constraint. And I can tell you, the readers are watching. They're watching for change. They're watching for characters to develop. So it's like kind of a long to-do list as we move through those books. But as Mike said, we're getting better. So that's good.
Yeah. Well, I think Ella Montgomery is on record as having gotten pretty sick of Anne of Green Gables by I think she had 6 or 7 sequels, and I think she kept trying to move away and readers wouldn't let her. So you can get constrained by
That's right.
by your creation for sure.
Sherlock Holmes tried to kill, sorry,
Yes.
I was going to say Sherlock Holmes. I mean, Conan Doyle tried to kill Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
He was lucky he wasn't killed himself over
Yeah,
over
exactly.
that. Right. Sorry.
Oh, we should all have such problems that people get,
Yes,
the world
indeed.
gets infuriated when we kill off our beloved characters. And just a reminder to people, if you want to ask questions, use the Q&A box rather than the chat. I was meant to remind people of this, so I just remembered. Dawn, what are your plans? You've just been told you've got to write 6 more sequels.
Well, so far I have a series of 1, but the book that I'm working on, the sequel, it is a sequel. And so maybe I do have some sort of a series starting to develop there. And the reason I decided to do a sequel was because one of the people who read and enjoyed A Life of Bliss said, "Oh, you've got a lot of really interesting characters there. I think you could do something with them in more books." So I thought, well, yeah, that could work. So the difference, though, is the sequel doesn't focus on the same main character as my first book. It's one of the important characters in the first book, but not the central character. So now I'm telling his backstory and his going forward story. But just to kind of show my bona fides as a mystery writer a little more, there actually is a murder in this one that my character has to help solve. So I'm getting a little bit more on track there. I think that if there is a series in what I'm doing, it might be sort of my newspaper newsroom characters, the Ottawa Advocate series or something like that.
Yeah.
But whether it goes beyond 2 or not, I don't know, but it might. Now, once I get the second one done, if it's okay, maybe I'll be inspired to try a third, and who knows after that.
Yeah. Well, that makes me.
I just want to talk about you. Like, what's your thinking on the series?
Well, I was going to just jump off of what Dawn said, because I've gotten myself into a little pickle where I've written The Foulest Things. It's had good reception. People have really enjoyed my protagonist, and I've got a sequel to it. It's coming out. I just got the advanced reader copies on Friday. So Speak for the Dead is coming on in March of 2023. But it's like Dawn, it's a different protagonist. So it's the same kind of world of the Dominion archives, but it's a different protagonist. And now I'm like, uh-oh, people really liked my character Jess, but this is a totally different person. So we'll have to see how it goes. I'm curious to see what the reaction is actually.
Does the character in your new book, does it include the character that was in the first book published at all? Completely absent, right?
Oops. I may have made a terrible mistake.
See, in my sequel, the character of the first book does appear. He's just more of a secondary character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good way to do it. I think. I think I have maybe. Anyway, we'll see what happens.
There's always
I
book
think-
three. Book three, you can fix it.
That's
That's
right.
right.
That's right. There'll be a reunion of some sort. Yeah, absolutely. I just have to keep everybody reading to book 3. That's all right.
Shouldn't be hard.
Okay, another question that actually I was recently on being interviewed by Alan Neal, which was wonderful with CBC All in a Day, and he and I had to come out for my first book, The Honeybee Emeralds, which isn't set in Canada, and I accidentally revealed that I had done that deliberately because I wanted to publish my first book and I was having trouble selling books in Canada, and he reacted. It was like I was, revealing that I was a murderer. Which I suppose you're not supposed to do that on CBC, admit that, make that admission. But now I'm out, so I'm telling everybody. But what have you wrestled with this question of setting, but particularly setting in Canada versus setting in the States or somewhere else, in terms of broader audience? And what's your experience been with that, Dawn? I know you've got that dual setting.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling about that is, I never really thought about setting my novel in the States for sort of purely commercial reasons, which is reasonably often why Canadian authors do it, because it would sell better in the States if it's an American setting. And in part because I didn't think that I would be able to pull it off. I thought that I know Ottawa, I know the newsroom in Ottawa that I want to kind of recreate in my novel. So it has to sort of start in Ottawa. And I had been to Greece, and I thought there was a good opportunity there for me to capitalize on that experience too. So if I decided to just kind of move everything to Boston or something, it would have been a lot harder to do it in any way that I would have felt competent to do, unless I decided to move to Boston for a month or something and hang out there. So to me, it was just, this is where the story took me. The Maria Callas angle on it, the fact that the ghost of Maria Callas sends my character on a quest, had to be to Greece because that's where the quest took him. So I couldn't set it anywhere else, really.
And Mary Jane, you had experience setting in the States, I assume partly for commercial reasons. Is that?
Well, I guess maybe it was actually, when I write a book or set up a series, it's mostly that I have a story I want to tell. I have a character I want to spend some time with, right? And some of these, so my American series, the first one was a professional organizer. And that I wasn't going to sell that in Canada. It was much cozier than my other books. Well, maybe Fiona Silk is as cozy as they come, but there wasn't really a market for it here. So, but it was a story I wanted to tell because I felt that professional organizing was actually a culture in itself, and I thought that perhaps it was apolitical. Geography didn't relate, but I still had to make the setting work. I have the 2 Canadian series. We tried to sell both of those in the States to the editor who did buy my other 2 series, right?
Right.
And he said, I can't get it through the editorial board. It's in the Canadian setting. And it has been suggested that I change that setting, but I couldn't because that setting was so irretrievably wound up with the characters and the story and the way we look at things. So I believe the Canadian books are Canadian books. And they're actually, in many ways, much more fun to write, right? Because we are who we are. We're just fabulous, right? So, but commercially, I think, yes, there is more money to be had in American books, but there's, in some ways, there's more freedom. In some ways, in the cozy world, there's a little bit less freedom because you can't swear in the books. You can't, you're really constrained. I'd never felt those constraints with my so-called cozy books up here. They could be edgy, they could have politics. People could sleep with each other, but they didn't seem to, but they could if they wanted to. And so there is much more freedom. And politics, I wouldn't dare try politics in a book that was set in the States. You'd be getting pipe bombs in the mail. So we are a little bit more open to that. So there's many differences between them. It depends on what you want to write and why you want to write it. Big advantages and disadvantages to each. If it's a small Canadian publisher, it will have a relatively small reach, although now with online publishing and sales, that reach is getting bigger all the time, and it may change the landscape. you know.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Mike, what about you?
Let me just say this. If you're thinking about sales as you're writing your book,
Yeah.
you're probably not writing the right book. And you're certainly not thinking the right way, because that's never what's going to be what it's going to be about. I mean, you have to write the story that comes to you. Like, people ask me, why is Windflower and indigenous? Why did you make him indigenous? I didn't make Windflower indigenous. He came as indigenous. He came as who he is as a character, right? And so, and the same thing with, I wanted to set the story in Canada, in Newfoundland. That was my goal. I wanted that. And quite honestly, if at the end of the day that no publisher would look at it and I could never publish it, then I would be happy with that, because I would have written the book that I wanted to write.
Hmm.
And, you know, I am a Canadian nationalist around this stuff, that, you know, like, I'm not sure that I could be any happier with a few more bucks to have my story set in South Carolina, and, you know, writing under pseudonym so that it would fit the right model that somebody wants. I'm not sure I'd be any happier, but I'm quite happy writing about my little village in Newfoundland,
Yeah.
and all the little characters. And at the end of the day, I feel good because that's the story I was supposed to write.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, and I'm not throwing rocks at anybody. I mean, whatever you decide, wherever you want to set it, that's great. Wherever the story comes from for you, that I think that's great. But for me, we need more Canada. Absolutely. We need more Canadian writers to write in Canada about Canada. And Louise Penny is a great model of that.
Yeah.
Like, we now have a model of Three Pines that's going to be all over the world, and it's fabulous. Murdoch Mysteries, which is set in Toronto, is all over the world. So
Yep.
why can't we tell our stories then and share those with the world, versus having to write to fit some publisher's model?
yeah, no. And I will say, I was a craven sellout for my first book, and set it in Paris very deliberately, as I've admitted to. But once I sold that book, I told the publishers, hey, I've got a couple of other books. They're set in Ottawa though. And they were like, yeah, sure. So I don't know if it's changing or what's happened, but my American publisher is very happy to be publishing these very Ottawa centric stories that I'm now writing. So maybe there is a shift, and Louise Penny and Murdoch Mysteries and all sorts of other places are, you know, bringing to mind, showing the world that we can have murder in Canada and it can be really interesting.
Or maybe your first book was just so damn good that they don't care where it's set.
Maybe.
Possible.
That's possible. Okay, well, one other big aspect of cozies is food and sensory experiences, and sort of that idea of sort of immersing the reader, evoking that place, but the experience, I guess. Just wondering if you do specific things to do that, if that's sort of when you're writing, if you're really thinking, oh, I want to describe this soup, or talk about this beautiful view very deliberately, or does that just happen naturally, or is that something you're less interested in? Mary Jane?
Yeah, I love this question. So when I do workshops and talk about writing or even talks to groups, I talk about the value of the senses to catapult the writer into the middle of your work. We have to use the senses. If you want to engage them, they have to see, feel, smell, touch. What am I leaving out here? What your character's experiencing. And so a lot of that happens naturally as you're writing. You're writing a story, you're seeing it in your head, kind of living it as it runs down your fingers and onto the keyboard, but not everything. So I usually do a scene by scene at the end, and I check to see what senses were used in that scene, and usually ones that are flat. There's something wrong with them. It's because the reader didn't have a chance to accompany the protagonist in that scene. So food is a great way. And I mean, Mike does that just so beautifully in Newfoundland. Sorry, if you were going to say that, Mike, I got there first. And Dawn in the same thing in Greece with all the interesting food. You were there because well, you didn't. I didn't know what the octopus tasted like, but I felt it would taste interesting. So and then what they hear, but I don't think we do it in a descriptive way, but rather because description is where a lot of people flip the pages, right?
Yep.
And Amy, I'm halfway through your Paris book, and you don't describe things. You describe what people are experiencing, and so what they're smelling, or the feeling of fabrics and things like this. And that's very, very powerful, and people really enjoy that. But another thing is animals. Animals are in many ways a sensory experience. And Mike, you have Lady, and you have the cat, the snooty cat. And I had 2 books out this year. There's 3 dogs in total on the cover. And people, when you talk about a dog, they feel the fur, they hear the panting, they feel the little needle-like teeth in their legs. Anyway, it catapults them into the story. So I think the senses are really our most fabulous tools to bring our readers with us. I stole your food line, Mike, but you can say so much more about it.
Well, get in there, Mike. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, I just on the food. I mean, the food's been one of the funnest parts of. That's a word. I'm going to use it.
It is now.
It is now, exactly. It's one of the funnest parts of doing the Windflower books is the food, because, I first started putting food in because you need a break in the action, because so much dialogue, like when you're writing a book, it's like you get tired of just dialogue, and so what breaks that up? You can do description, but like can't really describe. Like once you describe the fog once, how do you describe it again, right? But you can do food, right? And so food's a natural break in the story. It's a natural thing to do. And I like to eat. I like to eat much better than I can cook. But I'm always thinking, well, what would they have, right? What was something neat that they could have? And so I get a chance to go look up recipes, and Windflower likes to cook, and he started cooking at the B&B and cooking dinners and things like this, and so it adds another level, and I had the idea of doing a recipe book out of Windflower, but I'm not. It's kind of like a project that's one of the projects on the side of your desk. We'll see if we get there or not. But just on the animals, Ian Rankin's got a great story that he told at the last conference about if you put a dog in your book, be careful, because people will always come back and ask, why didn't you take the dog out? You've been going around. You've been going around now for 3 days, and what happened to the dog, right? And so, if you put animals in, you have to beat it. And the last thing about animals is, I have a cat. I'm not a cat hater. I just want to tell you, Windflower's afraid of the cat. That's what's going on here, because the cat is clearly a superior being to Windflower. So, the people who have cats understand that. So no bad news about cats. Cats are all good.
Don, did you want to finish us off with any final thoughts on food or other sensory?
I'll just say that in the sequel that I'm working on, the main characters are a kind of a crusty, now retired managing editor of the paper who's pretty basic kind of guy, and he gets into an unlikely kind of romance with the very highly educated editor of the paper. It's a very slow burning thing, but one of the ways that I advance that is through food. So, for example, the editor, who's say a very high end sort of person, invites the managing editor, retired, to an Ethiopian restaurant, and so I have a series of dishes being put on the table that poor managing editor's never seen in his life, has no idea what they are, and the editor in chief is raving about how delicious they are. So it's kind of a way to illustrate through food the differences of their own backgrounds and personalities. And there's another scene where they're camping, and he's taken her camping, which she's never done before, and he's whipping up dinner, and she's expecting something really good, and it's burgers and hot dogs. So it's a way of just kind of illustrating the different characters. And so I think that's apart from just the sensory aspects of it, that's a way you can illustrate and develop character.
Yeah, everything can be used, right, to feed character and build character.
Yeah.
Do we want to go to questions, or do we have a little more time for discussion?
Do the questions first, and then
Sure.
we'll see what we have left.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I've just got a couple of questions for you. So the first question from the audience is asking if the authors here could describe their writing space. What does their desk table look like? Is there any decor?
Yes, well, I'll start just because no one else has started yet. I have been writing at my dining room table, which is where I'm sitting right now, because the only office space in our house is occupied by my wife, who's been working from home for over 2 years. So I've got this sort of, very, very temporary space that I have to sit at, and every time I want to write, I have to put up my computer and get all my background material and put it on the dining room table. I'm sure that the others are doing it in a much more systematic way than that, but that's how I'm doing it.
Well, I write. I have the same space I write most of what I do. I can write just about anywhere, but not in a noisy environment. I have to have quiet. I also write better first thing in the morning. I'm fresher once I have some coffee. And if I'm writing a book, I usually have a word count for the day. I'm usually trying to do 1,000, 1,500 words. And so I usually can get 500, 600 words easy in the morning. And then I have to work really hard to get the rest.
I have a little office, I must say, although it gets very messy, and you'll notice you're facing away from my desk, and that will continue to be the case, right? As it was on a Zoom, I felt no need to tidy things up. But when things get quite out of control, I mean, and when I need to concentrate, I actually take a leaf from Don's book and I go to the dining room table because it's clean. And whatever I finish, I'm going to take it away afterwards. And sometimes that clear environment where you don't have maybe a stack of bills or mail or something like that that's next to you, or the dog dish or whatever, it just frees the mind, right? So but I do find it handy to have an office and to have my setup. And I've had that until I did have my own writing space. I never really was able to finish a book, so I'll never give up my office unless it means I have to give up my living room.
Right.
And I just finished a manuscript. I just sent it in on Friday, so that's exciting, or Wednesday.
Another one.
Another
one. Okay.
one. Now I'm done. Now I'm slowing down. Yeah, so I found that question really interesting because I drafted the whole thing. I have a little home office, and I drafted the whole thing at the office. But once it was drafted, I realized I started to roam. I have my laptop, so I spent a lot of time sitting on various couches doing all the editing. So yeah, so everywhere in my house.
Really interesting. Thank you for that. The second question that we had submitted was, does the writing in an Ottawa setting make it necessary ever to add a little politics into your stories?
Somebody else want to start that one, or should I?
Well, go for it.
Okay.
I'm making up a lie here. Okay,
yeah.
you do it.
Well, actually, I don't think it's absolutely necessary, but and I didn't have any politics at all in A Life of Bliss. But in my the one I'm working on, there is a sequence that involves some political players. So I think it gives you the opportunity to include politics, but I don't think it's requirement by any means.
Right. Camilla is a very political person herself. Camilla McPhee character. She is a lawyer who often is working as a victim's advocate, and so that sets her in a political. She's a person who wants to change things, change laws, change behavior of police and others. So I do try to stay away from party politics, because one thing is it actually dates a book pretty quickly, and another one is I always have a sign on my lawn. And the other half of the people won't buy my book. So I want to avoid that. But also, we're kind of immersed in politics all the time. And sometimes in the fiction that I work on, I want to get away from that and look at the broader context. Everything's really political. If there's a murder, there's probably a small p political aspect to it. And our values are politicized in many ways. So that's kind of how politics play out in my work. I had one MP, but less said about that, the better.
And I will say for my part, I think I agree with Dawn that that the setting offers you the opportunity to include some political, shenanigans, but it's not necessary. Ottawa is more than just politics, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
No politics in Newfoundland?
Mike's not even turning off his mic to respond.
The next question I think will inspire Mike to turn his mic on, which is, do any of you act as mentors or offer any workshops or other ways to inspire new or beginning writers?
Wow, there's a lot in there. I mean, this we talked earlier about Vicki Delaney gives Mary Jane credit for helping her get into the cozy mystery category. On my way up, I hope I'm still going up, I've had lots of people who've helped me, absolutely. And I will always help somebody else come up. I think that's part of our job. I think that part of our job is part of the reason why I've been part of Crime Writers of Canada. Part of the reason why we do these conferences is that we want to make that connection and help people. And Writers First offers some great tools. If you want to check it out later, I'm not going to get too far into promo on Writers First, but if you one of the services that we have is a writing coach, and then we have several people who are engaged with us who offer just that first piece of advice that people need to get them started, and then some secondary advice to keep them moving along.
I love giving workshops, and or interviews, that sort of thing, because I experienced so many positive things when I was getting started writing. There was a chance to take a session from oh my heavens, Sue Grafton at a conference, and many other people who were generous with their time. They were top of their game, and we learned so much from that. And I agree with Mike. You get something, you have to pass it along. But some of the people that I've met through workshops over time have gone on to do very well and to write fantastic books. So it also keeps us on our game and remembering, well, if you're giving a workshop, you're reminding yourself what the basics are too. But also it's a nice way to get out of the house and meet some other writers and have some fun and to contribute to the community. So the final thing I want to say about that is that the mystery writing community is extremely collegial and supportive. There's very little, I mean, I can't even think of a backbiter or a backstabber or people who are intensely competitive. That's because, if you're mad at somebody, just kill them on the page, right? We don't have to carry long-standing grudges. And this is why we're very nice people and nice and good to each other. And that's a fact. It's a great, great community. And it's a great community. And if anybody is listening who wants to learn how to write, almost everybody who's involved in this conference will be willing to give you a hand up for sure.
Yeah, I'd echo that experience, Mary Jane, that it is a wonderful community, and there is something about giving back when you yourself have received such help. So people shouldn't hesitate about reaching out and making connections.
So we'd all like your help to get it on CBC Radio, Amy. You just wanted to.
I wish I knew how I did it.
Very sick with jealousy.
And that's all my questions for you guys.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, those are interesting. So we probably have time then for one more question, which was around recommendations. I thought we could give a little shout out to any other Canadian-based or even Ottawa-based authors, cozy writers, mystery writers, or just authors we've been enjoying. Christmas is coming, and I'm sure people are looking to for lots of good book ideas after they've bought all of our books, of course. So anybody have any good any books that have grabbed them recently they wanted to recommend?
Okay, I'll go first. I mean, I want to say that that Amy's The Honeybee Emerald is a great book, right? You should have that book.
This
Absolutely.
has worked out very well for me.
And Don Butler's Life of Bliss is a great book.
thank you.
Absolutely, right? I mean, so you should have those. If those two books are not in your stocking already, go get them. You know?
Put them there.
And I guarantee you'll have fun with any of Mary Jane's work. That the Camilla McPhee stuff set in Ottawa, now going to Cape Breton. One of the first books I read, one of the first mystery books I read, was the Camilla McPhee books, and because it was set in Ottawa, I wanted to know if I would know places, and if you read them, you'll see places because Mary Jane does that. And also, she writes another series with her daughter, the Victoria Abbott series, which is great, right? I'd also want to give a shout out to two people who I think deserve that. And one is Liz Angus, who's going to chair the panel later. Her book, Not Your Child, is not a cozy. It's more of a thriller, but I guarantee it's a great book, and it's a great gift to give. And Linda Wicken, who isn't here, who writes great cozy series as Erica Chase. I think she wrote some as Linda Wicken too.
And Essie Lang too. She had 3 names. Yeah, and they're all available. Yeah,
and they're all in bookstores everywhere. They're great sort of formulaic, if I can say that word, cozy books. What you think of as cozy books with the dog on the front, and some in the library, and some in small town settings in the States. If you want a true cozy, Linda Wickens are some of those best.
right. That's right. So
Great.
yes, she's writing as Erica Chase also, and Essie Lang, and all and they're really they usually have an involvement with books and literacy, which is interesting, and so that's great. I would also like to give a shout out to Barbara Fradkin, who you can't go wrong with her books. And I thought that the panelists, I was very interested in the panels here, and there are a lot of terrific writers. And there were, I think, there was only one that I hadn't written, and that's Tom Kent, I think. And so I've got that on order. So we really have a lot of talent here, and we should be sharing that. But also, Crime Writers of Canada has a free online catalog of everything that members do in the course of the year. So if you want to stay on top of what is happening in Canadian mysteries, there's your ticket. And I have read all your books too, and I just think that some of them are actually going into some stockings that I'm giving out. So it's really a great group. We're very fortunate, I think, to have all this talent.
Thanks, Mary Jane. Dawn, recommendation?
Well, I mean, not to keep pumping the tires of our panels here, but I'm most of the way through Lounge Lizard, which
that's
is the first of Mary Jane's books that I've tried to read. I mean, I was late to the game there, late to the party. I'm really enjoying it. Now I, of course, want to read all your other books. But anyway, I'm enjoying that one. And Mike's series is impressive. What do you have? A dozen of them now, Mike? Something like a dozen books. And for people who like Newfoundland and like the characters that Mike's developed, which are quite interesting characters, I think they'd enjoy any of those. But let me also mention Brenda Chapman, whose Stonechild and Rouleau series, I've read some of those and found those were very well done. She's got a new series now called the Hunter and Tate series. Blind Date is the first one of those, so you could check that out. Maybe not in the mystery genre, but Kate Hartfield, who's a former colleague of mine at the Citizen, has had a lot of success with a book called The Embroidered Book, which is a historical romance with a little bit of magic thrown in, set in Europe in the late 1800s, I guess, 18th century. And Leo Valakat is another local writer, really off target here because he's a fantasy writer, But he's developed, he's written a book that's been published called Bane of All Things, which is kind of creating a Tolkien-esque imaginary world. And he has 3 more books coming in that series. So he's going to have a 4-book series. It's going to be quite the, if he can complete it, it's going to be quite the achievement to write these 4 books. So, you know, check out that if you like fantasy.
Wonderful. Thank
Great.
you. I'm going to just quickly plug my critique partner or my writing group partner, Wayne Ing, who wrote, if you've got a young boy who you want to encourage to read, he's got this wonderful novella, Letters from Johnny, that's set in the sort of 1970s Toronto, centered around hockey and the October crisis. Interestingly enough, there's a little murder mystery there, and it actually won one of the Crime Writers of Canada awards for novella, and it's a lot of fun. It's a really great, easy, fun read, good for kids maybe who are a little more reluctant. Letters from Johnny. So that's our time. And I wanted to thank you all so much on this rainy Saturday. This was so much fun to hang out with you. I've learned so much and been so inspired. So thank you all panelists very much.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Amy.
Amy.
Great job.
Good job, Amy.
Thank you.